And it's that time of year, so it's time to paint some spooky, scary skeletons. These are the Revnan Acolytes, and today we're going to be focusing on a unique color scheme for their bespoke cloaks. We're kind of basing these more off the card art compared to more so the official look of the pre-colored figures. I thought that red belongs more to the General Utkar, and Revnan needs to have a bit more of her identity as she keeps on stealing the red colors from that general. So today we're going to kind of give it more of a burgundy maroon look to really just kind of look like it belongs in the shadows of the Underdark that's not officially named the Underdark. Anyways, I'm rattling on, so let's get some color on these awesome acolytes and see what we can do with it. The acolytes, of course, are a common squad, so you'll want to work with this kind of in a factory assembly line method, but today we're just going to be focusing on what I assume the hardest model is out of the whole bunch. The wing model has a lot more typical curves, and the wings do cover up some key areas that we're going to be focused on painting today. We're going to start off by applying a zenithal primer to this acolyte, a black primer as the base layer with a white ink via airbrush on top. If you don't have a airbrush, you of course can use white primer or even dry brush using a slap chop method. If you want to use any contrast or speed paint methods, the model's also primed for this as well, and you can do that appropriately. Cloaks honestly work really well with speed paints, but we're going to do more of a classic style layering to get a little bit more texture and nuance on this cloak. And we're just going to go over trying to avoid the bones and all that kind of stuff on the model. We're not going to discuss today how to paint the bones, but maybe that'll be a future video on how to get some good skelly bones all painted up. Like I mentioned before, there are lots of angles, so you definitely want to use a paint holder for these to angle the model to get behind the wings and the various tiny kind of nooks and crannies on the model. You'll want to do a nice solid coat, 1 or 2 coats to fully kind of cover the area. We're looking to cover the model where the details still show through. They're not, of course, clogged, but it is a nice solid coat to just give a firm foundation of where we're going to next. And next I mixed Payne's Gray and Burgundy together, about a 1-to-1 ratio to make a nice kind of dark purpley red color, just to really kind of start building up these layers. You want the paint to be pretty thin, but not so thin that it kind of flows easily like a wash or a glaze. Right now we're sketching in where we want these lights to be. Always remember, these are common, so you're wanting to do a good job, but these don't need to be perfect. You're going to theoretically paint 2 or 3 squads of these for your army, and you don't need to win any competitions with these. Most parties get them ready for the table. I'm using this thin down layer, and I'm starting to just sketch out the values of this cloak, essentially focusing on the raised areas and the top parts of the cloak and sleeves would realistically catch. If you notice, I am avoiding the deepest, darkest recesses. I want a bit of that strong contrast, as we're looking to not use any washes for this model. Ultimately, you can use washes for capes and cloaks and such, but it's good practice to get out of the habit of doing that for many types of cloth and fabric material, as it often muddies it and makes it look kind of blotchy, as the wash would certainly settle in irregular ways on just the way the cape would flow. This is a bit more advanced than like a beginner tutorial, but honestly, learning to layer and build up color on cloaks and such is great practice to really improve your techniques in the future. I am using very thin paint, so you want to be careful not to overload and overwork an area. You want to put your area down, spread it to the appropriate thinness, and let it sit there. If you keep on kind of messing with the area, it will tend to get blotchy or too textured for what we're looking for. We're looking for some nice even blends. Another thing to notice is that when you layer up, you want to focus on where the light would hit and then pull your brush away from it. Pretty much the brightest area should have the most paint, and it should gradually blend into more of the shadowy or darker areas. Notice you just kind of grab your brush to the topmost part and bring it down. I also just use some stippling techniques where I just kind of dot the brush really fast in an area to build up a bit of a rugged and ragged texture. These are undead servants living in the underworld of Valhalla. They're most not likely going to have the most clean and kept robes. The key thing to remember with highlights is you want to be slow with it. And you can always kind of bring it back down if you bring it too high. The second thing to remember, I always say this, is that if everything's a highlight, nothing's a highlight. You really want to focus on that contrast between those deep recesses and the raised areas of the cloak. After we've kind of got this mix on, we do transition to our next step, which is just pure burgundy, appropriately thinned down as we kind of just repeat what we did in the previous steps. Just looking to catch these raised surfaces and areas. I'm definitely gonna have to go through and fine tune some of those areas, like on the sleeves, as the angle is just kind of, I didn't notice it when I was initially painting. You wanna make sure you kind of hit the tops of the sleeves, the top of the head, and these outermost raised areas. The more contrast you can add, the more poignant and strong it will look. So we're really looking just to use this inherent transparency of the paint to really catch the eye, give it a sort of otherworldly look as they are looming in shade and shadow. Next up, we are starting to add some more brighter highlights to really kind of sketch in the values of the cloak and such. I'm using warm flesh actually mixed in with burgundy. Again, about a 2 burgundy to 1 warm flesh, starting off just to add this lighter kind of pinkish color that blends really nicely where we want to go. Again, I'm using stippling just to add just a bit of rugged texture. We're going to blend this down so it looks a bit more smooth, but we're kind of just sketching out the outline of these shapes here. I'm probably using a bit too big of a brush. I think I'm going to transition down here in a bit, but I still kind of want to get these big shapes put in before I start working with a smaller brush. Key areas you want to focus on are the edges of this cloak. Since it's so shadowy and working with a lot darker colors, it helps if you kind of catch the edge of the cloaks and hems of things to really find the shape and find where we're going with this. But using stippling is a great way just to gradually blend these colors in a bit more organically, and we don't care if there is a lot of texture, as we mentioned before, as we want this to appear smooth, but these are ragged capes. You know, you can be a little bit messy with this. I'm kind of going against the flow of these hems right here, these flowing parts, just to kind of define it and add a bit more of that jaggedness to it. Next, I take that burgundy and mix it with water, so it's very heavily diluted to a glaze-like consistency. And I'm going over the kind of these bright spots. I think I went a tad bit too bright before, and I'm just kind of toning them down. Paint is naturally inherent, and glazing is a great way to make your things appear a bit more smooth and a little bit less harsh. I'm taking the bright color, I'm also kind of dragging it a bit into the shadows as well, as the shadows were very deep and dark, and I want them just to flow into the lighter areas of the cape, more so than be very intense separations. Painting is a lot of just kind of going back and forth, where you kind of want to decide on the actual value and tone of things. You know, it's okay to kind of raise things up a bit or realize it's too bright and then tone it back down and then raise it up, maybe with using a little bit less in the mixture. Also, doing this tends to take a bit longer, of course, but it does create more interesting colors. I'm fully in control of the light and the color in this situation here. Whereas, you know, if we just fully relied on the zenithal, it was reliant on that undershading we did to it. Now we're taking a more fine tip brush after those kind of wet blend layers have dried, and we're just going to add our last bit of highlights and details to this. This one is more focused on the warm flesh, just to really add a bit of brightness, and this is where we're going to add just the fine details to the cloak. We're going to really seal in these parts we want people to notice the most, as well as kind of the subtle details to make it stand out above a standard paint job. You definitely want to use more of a smaller size brush for this, as precision is key, and we don't want to over brighten and kind of have to repeat the process that we just did. I'm just bringing my brush in straight lines across the bottom hem of the cloak, just to really look like it's been scraping on the ground and it's been ran over rocks and such. Adding just a bit of that stippling motion as well, and just adding a bit of texture to these relatively smooth areas, or at least aware of the effect that the paint is having. This does take a bit of practice, as I mentioned before, but the acolytes are great models to practice. They're really big and they have really clearly defined cloaks. I'd say even if you don't do as many layers or make it as smooth as I'm going, even just adding these brighter colors onto it will really just make them pop on the battlefield. Really kind of elevate them from kind of their pre-paints, you know, definitely catch the eye of your opponent and maybe even make them feel too bad to send them back to death. That's the ultimate goal of painting Heroscape, is that your model looks so good that your opponent stays their hand and doesn't feel the need to kill you. Thankfully, these acolytes, even if they are dead, they'll pop back up and spawn serving your army. So if you notice, I kind of brightened it back up, and then I just took a very thin thing of burgundy and once again kind of sealing in these colors to what I want. So it feels very smooth. I feel like on top of the sleeves, I was a bit too bright. So I'm just taking this very thin down paint and, you know, hitting these tricky corners and kind of just having it settle in together. Again, these wings are just a pain in the butt, as there's just areas that are really hard to reach. I've actually had to kind of find myself bending the wings back just to hit those last areas, as you look at them from above, they're really easy, right there you notice, they're really easy to see from certain angles. Definitely doesn't hurt just to fill those areas in with black. Now we're doing our final edge highlights. Again, this is just to really shape this model. Less is more when you're doing edge highlight. Essentially, we're taking the edge of our brush and running it along the kind of outermost edge of the model. You notice on the sleeves, it kind of catches just a tiny bit of that light and helps it kind of not look like an amorphous blob as it kind of is outstretched in front of its body of the same color. I'm just adding some various lines and scratches here. And I'm just, like I said before, I'm just going back and forth. I'm trying to do something different with this video, as it's not like necessarily a linear process working on cloaks. You can kind of take this as far as you want. But I'm definitely just trying to catch the edges here. And if you notice, my hand is covered in paint. I just use that as, you know, I'd recommend that you use a napkin, but I just like seeing the colors and making sure my consistency is accurate all the time. I just got a nice scratchy cloak here. I think there I went a bit too hard on that. But if you, of course, go too hard on these details, you can just thin down the color below it and blend it back in. So no harm if you feel like you're going too bright. Oftentimes, a color will appear brighter when you apply it, but you want to wait till it fully dries because it may darken as it's reached this, final actual true color on the model. Just these simple lines really just add doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Often painting, you find that just like a single line will make a whole difference on this model. And we're just doing some of the last details here, almost using just that pure flesh tone with just a tiny bit of burgundy mixed in. Sometimes I find it's helpful to do what's called a double edge highlight, where you do a slightly darker color and then go over that with the more brighter version of that, just to add a bit of two-toned nature to those really prominent edges. It of course takes more time, but it will really help to make your model sing. And then we're just finishing up this model here. I went through, of course, did some more back and forth, getting these things to a point where I was happy with, and finished the rest of the squad. I definitely recommend that if you're looking for a fun formula to definitely have your Revnan Acolyte stand out a bit, give this a try. It's honestly not too hard once you kind of get the consistency of the paint down, and all it requires is a bit of patience. If you're looking to kind of paint your models in more of a standard way, looking to improve your craft, again, these are great models to do so. The Acolytes, it's no joke, tower above other people, and these bigger models, while many people have issues with them, are great just to practice your skills. And I'd say there's no bones about it. Cloaks are really fun to paint. I definitely encourage you to try out different styles and different color schemes to get these minis painted as they rise from the gray. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more Heroscape content and be on the lookout for more spooky things this Scapeween season.